What's up everybody, it's Aiden from EDMProd. So in Ableton Live's 10.1 update, they introduced a new tool called Channel EQ. Channel EQ is the third addition to the library of EQs in Ableton, along with EQ8 and EQ3. Some people like to count autofilter as an EQ, but it's not really, sorry guys. So with this new addition, why did Ableton add it? And how does it differ from what already exists? And when should I use this one over the other two? So to get the most out of this video, I'm going to go through each one of these, then show you some examples. Make sure to watch the whole thing so you fully understand how to use these to the best of your ability. So let's start with Channel EQ, it being the newest one. Now, the aim of Channel EQ here is for it to be a very simple EQ. It's not trying to be something you'd use to fix technical problems in a mix. Why? Well, it's got 3 bands for starters, and it doesn't really have cutoff controls. It's pretty simple to use. Now, word has it from Ableton that this was modeled off an analog desk. It is trying to mimic it. I don't know what specific desk. My guess would be something like an SSL desk or similar, where it only had the 3 knobs and you had control only for the mid knob as to what frequency it was cutting. This was a lot of EQs that were channel EQs back in the day on desks. So it's kind of a bringing of the simple workflow back into the complex working environment of a DAW like Ableton, which I personally am a big fan of because I'm a big fan of simple. So why would I want to use this instead of EQ8 though? What I'll do is I'll drag in a drum break sample so we can have a listen to this material on it and we can hear what difference it makes. So let me load up the channel EQ. So we got a kind of normal drum break there. We've got the low, high, and mid, and then the output gain, as I said. We've also firstly got this high pass at 80 Hertz. Now, this is cool if you're just wanting to get rid of any really low sub-frequencies. It sounds really smooth. It's not a harsh cutoff. It's very musical. And that's the term I want to keep coming back to here, is musicality. The channel EQ is not a technical EQ. It's not for surgical application. It's not for trying to fix really pressing mix issues. It's to simply shape the sonic, scape of a sound. You know, if it needs more bass, you can just chuck more bass in. If it needs more highs, you can just chuck more highs in. You don't have to think about where you're doing it. It just sounds good. That's because of these smooth shelves and the smooth curves, and just the way that the EQ works. The way the EQ works is that for boosting, it has a lower cutoff frequency, but for cutting, it typically has a higher cutoff frequency, and that moves as you cut more. So it kind of adapts to the sound and the amount of change that you're making. So you can hear what I mean when I check this up here. Like cutting these lows, that really thins out the sound, but here we get a really solid low end. So that's really cool. And it's very similar with the high end. It's got a certain cutoff. When we reduce it though, the cutoff stays around the same, but it does actually add in a low pass filter that starts right up at 20K. As you can see there, it comes in, and then it goes all the way down to 8 kilohertz, just under 10 there. This is what those desks would do. They wouldn't just add a shelf, they'd also start to filter out some of those really harsh frequencies with a nice little slope there. Because of course, once you get to the end of the shelf, it's not reducing it significantly, it's only just doing it a little bit. So that filter kind of tapers it off really nicely, and it just helps things to sound a lot more musical and a lot more natural when you're EQing them, apart from like the other EQs, which take a bit more work to get some natural sounding out of them. Now, I'm not really sure whether this does any sort of distortion or drive with the low, but it sounds damn good. So it might be subtle, just sounds really good, and I would use that to color all sorts of material. And lastly, we've got this mid control. It kind of gets a bit wider as you push it down. Now note these ones actually don't go as high or as low as the low and mid do. You can only go 12 dB either way, whereas with these ones you can go -15, and you can only go between 120 and 7.5. You can't go up into the 10K range, which is honestly fine because, I mean, the bell curve is going to probably boost a lot of that anyway, but you don't really need to. You got the high control there. So yeah, this is a really, really nice EQ. Now let's compare this. Let's make sure we turn it off to something like EQ8. Now, obviously EQ8 is a lot more complicated. So I will do a brief explanation of EQ8 for those who haven't used it before, because I do want to explain how all of these types of EQs work. So in EQ8, you've got 8 bands of frequencies. Now, mine is set up a bit different by default here to maybe how yours is set up with the default Ableton. That's because I may have saved my default preset a little bit differently. But you've got a few different types of curves here, and you can change each of the 8 bands to any of the different types. You've got 2 high pass filters, a low shelf, a bell curve, a notch, a high shelf, and 2 low pass filters. The ×4 ones here are 4 times as steep in terms of the cutoff slope, so you'll see them here. So let's listen to how each of these sound. It's a bit more of a thinner sound. You can do that there. You got a bell similar to that middle one there. You got a notch, which I don't use too much, but you can notch out a very thin range of frequencies. If you're so inclined, you can do a high shelf, and you can do a low pass, which sounds a lot more resonant. So then you can do 8 of those. So you can combine a bunch of things to however you want, and it's really, really nice. Now, you can go up or down like in the channel EQ, except you can also change the Q, which is the width of individual shapes. So you can make one really narrow for cuts, really wide for boosts. Which is really neat. And that is the basic functionality of EQ8. You've also got some other really cool, useful features, which, once again, are for more technical applications. For example, like audition mode, where you can listen to what you're adding or cutting out. You can enable or disable the spectrum behind it. You can't do that in channel EQ, which is something that it would have been nice, but because you can't really, I mean, in the original EQ, you can't actually see the spectrum, but it is nice to be able to see it. Sometimes I just like to be able to EQ without visually looking at things, though. There's a couple of different modes. For example, if I turn it onto left and right, we've got 2 sets of 8 for both sides, which is insane. So you can do some really drastic EQ on the left and the right, and the mid and the side. Mid and the side just means the middle mono signal versus what's on the sides, which is the difference between the 2 channels. You got adaptive Q, which is very similar to how this works, but I guess it kind of becomes narrower as you go up more or down more versus wider on the other one. It seems it gets a bit wider. You've got a scale control to, I guess, multiply or invert the gains of all of the curves at once. So if you've got multiple curves, you can invert them, make that one down. So that's really cool if you're wanting to kind of, I guess, it's almost like a dry wet for the EQ, but you can go backwards. And then you've got output gain, which is very similar to the output gain on there. So obviously, based on that description alone, you can see that EQ8 is a much more complicated EQ because it is. The idea behind that is it's made for complicated mixing adjustments. So if you've got resonant frequencies, if you really drastically need to shape the sonic scape of a sound, you can do that with EQ8. You can do mid-side EQ. You can change how it sounds on the left, on the right. This is like, I guess, more of a Swiss knife EQ, but it doesn't necessarily sound as musical because you don't get the instantaneous control of just increasing something and it just sounding good. You know, it's not adjusting to the amount that you're putting into it. It's just, I guess, a generic boost or a generic cut. It's not adaptive per se. So let's quickly take a look at EQ3. You might be thinking, well, if we've got a channel EQ with 3 bands, low, mid, and high, haven't we already got an EQ3 with 3 bands, low, mid, and high? Well, to be honest, EQ3 was originally made as a DJ EQ for people who wanted to do live things in the EQ world. For example, they might want to take the lows out of a track while they're mixing in another one in a live set. So when Ableton Live, and it still is very much used for live performance, this was a big part of people's live performances, and it was a low CPU, really simple EQ. You didn't have to think about it. And they've also got these really nice isolation switches, which basically allow you to turn this off. Basically allows you to turn off EQ bands, which is really sick. You've obviously got gain for each of those, but you can see it's not really made for drastic EQing because, well, you can only go up 6. You can go down to infinity, which takes it out completely, but you can go down to 6. So they're kind of like isolating EQs, which once again is good for live performance. But when it comes to traditional EQing in the world of music production, it's not really that practical or lucrative. However, it can be good for sound design if you're wanting to, I guess, create like a cool lo-fi sound. You can isolate just the mids and customize where the crossovers are down here between those bands. And then you've got this slope switch. So 48 is going to be a much steeper straightaway cutoff, whereas this is a more gradual, arguably more musical cutoff. This one sounds way more precise though. So I'd be using this for occasional creative sound design if I'm wanting to create like kind of a lo-fi effect, because it is really simple to use and you can't quite get those isolating features in. Let's delete a lot of these ones. You can't get that isolating feature in EQ8 unless you do an actual filter. But see, you can only go down to 15 and it has this weird artifact here. So I do like EQ3 for that feature particularly, and just for simple EQ applications. But versus EQ, the channel EQ, I'd use this for musical practical applications. Say I need more bass in a sound, I'm not going to use EQ3, I'll use this one. I'd use this on a drums bus. I'd use this in, trying to cut out the mid-range of a really mid-rangey sounding keyboard, This one I'd use if I wanted to create like a lo-fi kind of like crispy pad or something like that, and I just wanted to let the mids through. I didn't want to let all this other crap through because it sounds really precise and it sounds really clean. So there's a difference between those two there, and I hope that makes sense. If there's any questions you guys have as to the difference between these two, let me know in the comments. So for example, let's see how I can use all 3 of these in the one application. So I'll start with channel EQ. So say I want to just introduce some low end. I just want these drums to slap. And then these mids, that's quite harsh around there. I just want it to sound smooth, and this is not sounding smooth, but I do want some high end, so I'm gonna. See, that just sounds really damn good. The low end sounds bumping, the highs nice, the reduction of the mids just sounds really nice. It doesn't sound obvious. It's like it just moved the audio in the exact way I want it. Now, let's see if we can use EQ to clean up some things more precisely. So this is a bit resonant there. We can use it more precise to get rid of that low end rumble. We've also got quieter steep. It's a bit sharp around 10K. That sounds really nice, actually. Maybe we could boost up these mids a bit. Just about half a dB. And lastly, we can use EQ3 just to, as a creative effect. So say we had this drum loop playing throughout our entire track. We could like have this as like an automated effect almost. So like we could turn it on for the last little bit and then have it go back into the normal EQ curve. So it's almost like a creative effect. Because you can't get such good isolation. You could use 2 filters on an EQ8, but I don't know, this is just a really easy low CPU way to do the exact same thing. So it's up to you, personal preference really. And we've used 3 EQs there to make a difference to the sound. So this is what it sounded like before. I really like the way that sounds mixed now. If that's just me, might just be me, but yeah, we've managed to use all 3 types of EQs in this case. And I hope this has demonstrated to you how you can use each of these 3. Sorry if this was a bit of a longer video, but I really wanted you guys to walk away with something today and be able to use all 3 of these EQs when you're in Ableton. Now, if you guys have any questions about what we've done today, what we've gone through, just let us know in the comments and one of us will get back to you. Apart from that, guys, make sure to like this video if you got something out of it. Really appreciate it. And subscribe for more YouTube tutorials from the EDMProd team, from Connor Samurai. And make sure to share this video with a producer buddy who may also need help with EQing in Ableton and would get something out of this video. It'd be awesome. Alright guys, we'll see you in future. We've got some more 1-hour builds coming in the coming weeks, so we'll see you for that. Got more stuff on the website. Make sure to go to edmprod.com to check out the latest on the blog. Apart from that, guys, peace out and have a good rest of your week. See you later.